Welcome pilots, my name is Hybrid V and today we are taking a look at structural salvage in 3.22 PTU that dropped to Wave 1 over the weekend, and also talking a bit more about a phenomenon that we've been seeing more and more coming into the game, known as Beam Citizen. Structural salvage has been a hot ticket item this year as it's meant to complement scraping, which came in earlier. A lot of people have been waiting for salvage to come online for many years now, but unfortunately it was always constantly put on hold time and time again due to missing tech requirements. Eventually, we finally got scraping as a first iteration, which was cool, but was sometimes buggy and ultimately was not the most engaging mechanic compared to something like mining. Couple that with slow collection rates and the vulture being annoying to use since you had to constantly leave your seat to swap out boxes, scraping was mostly left to the wayside by many players who just opted to do cargo hauling or mining instead. Now, with structural salvage, the salvage gameplay loop was expected to take on some more expansion and depth. And while we got some awesome quality of life improvements such as salvage cargo buffers and an improvement to the scraping speeds, we also got the ability to break down hulls, and this seems to be where a lot of the community has some pain points. If you're not already aware, structural salvage requires you to find a wreck, break down the wreck with an invisible beam, and then disintegrate the wreck into parts, which can then be sucked up into a grinder using another invisible beam, and then have those neatly packed away collected salvage turned into construction materials which can then be packed as SCU crates onto your ship. This is the same for both the Vulture and the Reclaimer, which has a new updated claw to fit this loop. And the consensus from a lot of players is that, well, it's boring, and it's also missing additional planned features such as gas extraction and hull fragmentation, for example, and ultimately the fading out of wrecks just looks, well, kinda bad. On top of that, this is just another example of CIG opting for more Beam Citizen surface level gameplay rather than the original deep approach that was penned years ago where players would need to carefully cut up and mulch parts of the ship. Instead, what we got was space magic that breaks the ship down. So why did CIG opt to go for this route for salvage right now? Well, the answer is quite simple. Beam Citizen is a far easier system to implement and build upon than it would be to flesh out and implement all the complex mechanics they plan to create in one go with bespoke systems and animations that may or may not even work out and would require further reiteration anyway. Torsten, a CIG dev, explained on Spectrum that CIG wanted to get salvage out quickly, and this would be the easiest way for them to do it. But furthermore, salvage is not even close to being finished as the system will deepen even further as Maelstrom, ship physicalized damage modeling, and the engineering systems come online. Salvage in the future will also be far deeper and far more skill driven than it currently is now. This makes what we have now sort of an in-between to tie us over while those new systems slowly come online next year, giving CIG the opportunity to test gameplay loops and improve on it now rather than having to rehash everything again later. Now, I'm paraphrasing Torsten's response, so if you want to read his reply yourself, I'll have a link for you down below to check out. Now, structural salvage has led to a bit of a tiff in the community as many have pointed out that compared to the mining career when it first released, salvage has largely been a letdown as mining started from the jump with an interesting skill-based mechanic, whereas salvage has largely been lacking any skill requirements since day one. And this again goes back to the missing tech that CIG needs to make salvage more appealing. But for them to get it into our hands on a quicker timetable, they ended up truncating large portions of the gameplay to be filled out later, thus Beam Citizen. Now, in that same post I mentioned, Torsten explained that there will be some minor adjustments later on based on feedback to add a little bit more complexity, and that we'll also know a bit more about structural salvage and its future in a later ISC. But even so, this still leaves citizens wanting more. In one camp, you have some who expressed enthusiasm to have these new systems in early to test and provide feedback for, as well as many of these folks have been waiting for years to actually try out salvage on a more complex scale than what we had initially, which was just scraping. And on the other hand, you have people who wanted it the way it was originally designed and laid out to the backers, with far more complexity and skill required. And this is where CIG painted themselves into a corner. It's a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario of their own making, of course. And I myself have expressed disappointment of early implementations of gameplay loops relying on beams and space magic. For example, when medical gameplay came in, I was really excited to learn about it and to eventually teach it to, say, like my org mates and to train medics and build professions around it. But what we got instead was magic pens and magic beds that healed you, and a medical tool with green magic beams that also could heal and dispense drugs to mask player injuries automatically without any skill required. That is, unless you count fighting the medical tool's interface itself as an actual skill. After playing other games like Tarkov, Project Zomboid, DayZ, Arma 3 with Ace 3, it just felt like a letdown that system we got instead was just not that complex, especially for a game with this type of budget. Now, to be clear, the medical system in Star Citizen is actually pretty good in my opinion, it's just how you interact with it that can sometimes feel very surface level. However, despite my disappointment, this was the route they chose, as beams are just a simpler system to implement, and sometimes simplicity is a lot more fun than just having hardcore realism. But even so, this new structural salvage system seems to be breaking the camel's back here, as players are really not liking the perception of shortcuts being made here. After all, if simplicity is supposed to be there to make things quick and fun, but players are not finding this new passive gameplay feature to be fun at all to begin with, then what was even the point? Engineering gameplay was something that I was really excited to hear about at CitizenCon, and it's had me on pins and needles since. I love multi-crew gameplay, and as many of you know, some of my multi-crew videos are some of the most watched videos on the channel, indicating that a lot of you are also in love with the idea of multi-crew just as much as I am. And the showcase that we saw at CitizenCon was incredible. But once again, Beam Citizen crept in, as the staff playing the demo aboard the C2 were using multi-tools to repair damaged equipment in what seemed to me like boring repair item with beams, so line goes up gameplay. Now, to be fair, there will be a lot more involved with the initial implementation, such as fires and whatnot, and CIG have already gone on to confirm that the beams will more than likely not be permanent, but more of an addition to more complex systems coming in later. But even so, it still feels like a small letdown. Now, hopefully the gameplay it will bring to the persistent universe will more than make up for it. I'm pretty optimistic regardless. Ultimately, communication is key here. I'm reminded of an old military and business concept known as commander's intent, which is to lay out the desired outcome and the path to get to that outcome, and to ensure ambiguity is kept to a minimum for all involved, since everyone is now on the same page. We know what the end goal for Salvage is, but what about the in-between on the path to get to that end goal, which was the part that I felt was not communicated as strongly to the community early on, and thus the intent was misunderstood and expectations were not met. Now, personally, I'm okay with these kind of truncated gameplay aspects. It does bother me to some degree, like I've mentioned before in this video, but ultimately it's because I now understand where CIG is coming from, but a lot of that had to do with me kind of reading the tea leaves and really digging for that information, and I really would like CIG to just go out of their way to explain that this is the reason why they are doing things like that. Spectrum posts, comments on another live streamer's channel, or even just passing comments on Star Citizen Live, I don't think really cut it. After all, every time they do an Inside Star Citizen, they always leave a giant watermark on a lot of the gameplay features that they showcase to remind you that this is all work in progress, and I feel like they really should be beating that drum on new gameplay elements that they're bringing in to help set expectations. Remind folks, hey, this is the early implementation, like they did when they first showed off structural salvage, where it was in a really early rough state. They should, at that point, have reminded folks that this is probably going to be closer to what we could potentially expect, because we are expecting far more features to come in after that to further flesh it out. Unfortunately, they did not do that. They just said, hey, this was the earliest implementation that we're showing you here, where it is the rough kind of R&D part of it. And then that was the last we kind of heard of it until it finally came in. And what we got was a much more polished version of what we had saw there, but it was never communicated to us that that was the kind of intent going forward, was to have that system, or at least potentially have that system. There was no explanation of that whatsoever. So what happened is when people finally got it in their hands, people were disappointed. Now, I think CIG have thoroughly explained it pretty well here, and I'm assuming with the new ISC coming in and them talking about it, they're going to have even further explanations on it, but this should have been done much sooner, and it should be done way sooner for other features coming in too if they plan on doing this. For example, like engineering gameplay. Well, what are your thoughts on the whole Beam Citizen and structural salvage fiasco? Are you okay with them piecemealing out mechanics early for them to be tested and worked on and improved over time? Or do you think they should release new careers, feature complete from the get-go, and build upon that instead? Let me know below and let's have a chat. Alright folks, that's it for me today, talking about structural salvage and Beam Citizen gameplay, and what it means for the game now and for the future. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave a like, as it really does help out the channel. And of course, if you want to see more videos like this and much more down the line, subscribe. Until next time, fly safe, and I'll see you all in the black.